if I could help one person not have to experience what I did, this would all be worth it.
From what I hear with both of you is what happened to you changed the course of your life. I had all these different thoughts of who I was going to be and what I was going to be and how I was going to live. And it changed. If you're able to be for someone at their time that they need you, that you didn't have, it just feels really good. Welcome to A Place of Yes, a podcast about how I moved through my darkest hour. And for me, that was in channeling my grief into good. Welcome to the show. So today's guests on A Place of Yes are Kara Robinson Chamberlain and Kimberly Corbin Rourke. I was lucky enough to be a guest on their show, Survivor's Guide to True Crime, and I am super excited to have you guys here on A Place of Yes. We talked about that sort of intersection of trauma and grief and the areas where a lot of those emotions and feelings and reactions and people's reactions, a lot of them are similar, even though our ways of getting there have been different. Thank you both for being on the show. I appreciate it. And I think that your stories and the topics we will talk about together, things that we both share and things that kind of frankly piss us off and how people react, will really resonate with my audience. So thanks for being here. So one of the things about this episode, I'm talking with Kim and Kara, and we talk a lot about losing track of our thoughts, life with kids, balancing it all, and what to do when you just kind of don't remember. I was really happy to be able to share with them that I have for about the last 5 or 6 weeks been taking Magic Mind. Every day I take my shot right after my coffee. And while I'm not perfect, I am definitely feeling a little sharper. I'm feeling less fogged, and I'm feeling like I might actually remember what I come in the room for. So Magic Mind is a mental performance elixir. That's a fancy word for kind of a green juice shot. It is awesome because it gives you a sharper mind, lower stress, and better energy. That last piece is really what helps me the most. I have sustained energy throughout the day. I don't need more coffee that makes me jittery. If you want more information, go to magicmind.com/place of yes. And if you look to buy it, you can buy individual or a subscription. Place of Yes 20 is the discount code. For all this information, you can find the links in the show notes. I am hoping that each of you would be willing to share whatever you're comfortable with about your stories.
I'll start. Awesome. Just for clarity, some people confuse my voice and Kim's voice on audio. I'm Kara and I'm Kim, and that's Kim over there. So my story and how I got to be where I am today. I was 15 and I was kidnapped by someone who I later found out was a serial killer. I escaped from him after 18 hours of captivity, being sexually assaulted multiple times. After I escaped, I was able to lead law enforcement back to his apartment and give them information to help identify him, which helped them to identify him as the person responsible for at least 3 homicides. I formed relationships in law enforcement through that experience and went on to work in law enforcement administratively all through high school and college, and then went on to become a sworn law enforcement officer, working as a school resource officer, and then an investigator, and then a victim's advocate up until the birth of my children. And currently I am doing advocacy things online, hosting the podcast, doing media and social media and keynote speaking and raising kids. I have 3 of those now, which is weird. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, thank you. And actually, one of the things I wanted to say first is, and you kind of touched on it, was that both of you in your, I said the name of the podcast, Survivor's Guide to True Crime, but the fact is that you are both survivors. You are telling the stories of other survivors, and your podcast is for survivors. So you guys are both out there doing like this really important work.
Well, and we talk about it being by survivors, with survivors, and for survivors. And that was really central to the creation of the podcast and how important it was to have the voices that are being represented have that autonomy and ownership over their story and how it's distributed. So yeah, thank you very much for pointing that out too. I'm Kim, for those of you listening. This is my voice. I have no accent that I'm aware of. I'm Kim Corbin. I grew up here in Colorado. I went to the University of Northern Colorado in 2004. And when I was going into my junior year, living in off-campus apartments, a stranger broke in, held me captive for 2 hours, and sexually assaulted me. I survived that rape and immediately reported to 911. There was a 3-week investigation and time where they were trying to figure out who this was. And he was eventually captured half a mile away from my apartment, picking out his next victim. So we went through the entire court process. And this is where mine and Kara's stories tend to diverge, is that I had a lot of interaction with law enforcement and then the court system. So we went all the way to a jury trial. The following year, he was found guilty of burglary and of sexual assault, and he is currently serving 24 years to life in the Department of Corrections. That whole experience for me really made me think through, what am I going to do with this? And I made the choice to release my name to the media, which at the time didn't happen. There was no one out there for me to feel like, oh, I have this place, or somebody else really knows what I'm going through. And I wanted to be that voice. So I started sharing my story in a very organic format and just answering questions, and it took off. And so I ended up changing my major. I went to school for criminal justice and psychology for my master's program, and it was the opposite for undergrad. I worked at the police department as a victim advocate, and then later at the district attorney's office running the adult diversion program, and was a community relations director. So I've had a lot of experience in the system, but also the whole time I'm doing this, I'm also doing media and victim advocacy trainings, and all of those things together. I'm also a wife to my wonderful husband, Michael. We've got 4 kiddos, 2 of which I grew myself. So our youngest now is 9. So Kara just had a baby, and I'm like, I don't remember all those things. It's crazy. And our oldest is 17. So we've got a little range between the 4 of them. But today I am doing the same things that Kara is, where we make content and host the podcast, and are still looking for ways to continuously improve our advocacy efforts and our education, and bringing those stories and helping others share their stories that's always been my passion. The whole thing that I think through is that if I could help one person not have to experience what I did, that this would all be worth it.
So I think this is one of those areas where there is this like intersection, because from what I hear with both of you is what happened to you changed the course of your life. You entered careers, and what you are doing now is different likely than what you would have done had this not happened. And I think with me, I have that same thing, right? My son got very, very sick out of nowhere. He passed away when he was 4. I had all these different thoughts of who I was going to be and what I was going to be and how I was going to live. And it changed. I'm really happy with what I'm doing now. And you touched on those ideas of being the person for others that you didn't have. And it's taken me years to kind of figure that out. But that's sort of where I get my most, I don't know if satisfaction, I'm not sure what that word is, but like where I feel the best of, right? Like if you're able to be for someone at their time that they need you, that you didn't have, it just feels really good. One of the things that I think where our stories can overlap is in that idea of grief. Like for me, the grief is really obvious because I lost my son, but there's that whole idea of grief being not always related to death, right? Like being this idea that you're coping with loss, grieving what you thought you were going to have, just coping with it, right? Like coping with the life you thought you were going to have and don't have. People would always say to me, well, you should grieve the life you thought you were going to have. You should grieve the loss, like not just Jake dying or Jake being sick. And I fought that for a long time. Did you feel like this loss, like that you had to grieve the life you thought you were going to have based on what happened to you in the course that it took?
Totally. Kara and I have had this conversation in different capacities. I feel safe saying that, yes, both of us did, but they looked different, and they happened at different times too. So this concept of grieving what I wanted to be doing, it started as soon as that day, right? I had plans to take my mom down to Denver to go shopping and out to lunch because it was her birthday. And immediately those plans have to change. It's later in the semester when I'm failing all of my classes and having to go to therapy. I'm having to grieve my GPA. I'm changing my major then and losing all of this time that other people are going forward with their credits. And I'm stuck having seizures. Like there's different points where you have to recognize that the things and the anger or whatever that emotion is that you're holding on to is from a place of grief. And while there's nothing that you can necessarily do for it, knowing that other people have felt that and addressing it in yourself and getting it out is a huge path forward. And we find that through all stages of grief.
I think it's like you said, it's like facing it, right? Because it's like you feel it and you know it's there, but it's the one thing that I wouldn't really let myself like tap into.
I honestly think most of my experiences with processing my trauma have been significantly delayed, because if anyone hears me talk about my story, one of the things that they always come back with is how unemotionally I tell my story. And it's because when my trauma happened, my trauma response was just to shut off the emotions. And so there's not a lot of emotion that was encoded, but it also became my trauma coping mechanism. So whenever I was stressed, it was okay, can't deal with that. We're going to put it in a little box. It doesn't exist. And so there's not a lot of emotions that I can identify as having in the immediate. But what I have experienced is more of the long term identification of that grief of, well, this isn't the parent that I thought I would be. I think that I feel it mostly in my parenting journey. I don't have the emotional capacity, or I have anxiety, or I have whatever that looks like. I don't have the capacity that I wish I had, or that I thought I would have. And maybe that's because I was so young.
I was going to say you were 15. Like that's, you're still developing, right? Like,
like what, I don't even know what my dreams were. And
Yeah.
nothing that, I mean, how many of us change our ideas of what we want to be 15 times before, in
100%.
between 15 and 30, right? So I don't think there was a lot of grief of what could have been in that aspect. It's been more of how it has impacted me long term. On the flip side of that, it's exactly what you already said, that we would not be here doing what we're doing today. I literally just had a meal with a friend this morning and was telling her, I haven't seen her in years, and I was telling her about all of the things that I have going on. And she said, do you think you'd be doing any of that if what happened hadn't happened to you? And I'm like, absolutely not. You can have these two flip sides of the coin. And it feels weird to say, you don't want to say that you're thankful for the bad things that have happened, but also I feel like to not acknowledge that these horrible things that we go through lead us to what can become a very fulfilling, beautiful life. I feel like that would just be negligent of me to not acknowledge the part that this negative experience played in this wonderful place that I am right now. So it's complex.
I think that's such a huge point you brought up too. And it's one that has come up in a lot of my guests and a lot of just in my life. That whole two things can be true. This really horrible thing happened. That's very true. But then my life right now, in ways because of that horrible thing, is really powerful and good. I think people sometimes have a really hard time with that two things can be true idea, but you're 100% right. I don't know if it's an internal struggle or whatever, but this idea of like, I really am proud of the work that I'm doing now. And I'm proud of the people that I can help and like the comfort I can provide for other people. But the flip side is I kind of want my son back. Like I'd rather be like this like different shallow person with my family still intact. But because of that, I'm here doing these things. So it's challenging. You both have touched on motherhood. I know for me, the loss of Jake, I have had to really check myself sometimes in mothering Ethan because I live a scared life for him sometimes. And I live a scared life for me. Like I've gone through this loss. I don't know that I can do it again. Like, so I have to really check my own anxiety and my own nerves and my stuff. And I suspect, I don't know, but I would suspect that that plays a part in your parenting too, and your mothering, right? How do you balance that?
So 2 points. First, I actually, Kara, I forgot to tell you this the other day when we were talking, but my daughter was over at a friend's house a few days ago, and it was time to leave. And I had been sitting there talking to her mom for a while, and I couldn't find her. And she had gone outside to throw something in my car and came back in. And I was looking for her for like 10 minutes, which she doesn't hide. She doesn't run away. Like she always answers. And I could not find her. And I'm having like immediate, oh my God, did she go out to water the flowers and somebody put her in the Trans Am and drove her somewhere? Like it's Kara's story that was in my head suddenly because I know that one from her talking about it so much. And I had to make sure that I wasn't acting or reacting in a way that, was detrimental to her. She was hiding in a closet because she didn't want to come leave and go home, which is new for her. But
and totally normal kid behavior, but our stuff makes it like different.
Yeah. Like, okay, don't freak out but it was just interesting because it was Kara that was in my mind instead of my own stuff. On the other side of that, the choices that I and my husband have made, knowing all of the bad things that can and do happen in the world probably helped. And I say that because primarily the conversations that we're talking about with consent don't just shape the conversation that we're having by the time they get prepubescent or that we're talking about intercourse. They have been going on since the kids were verbal. You do not have to give someone a hug. Yeah. If you don't want to share your toy with the stranger at the park, you don't have to. You can say no, and that is okay. So these conversations I wouldn't have thought to have if I'd have been not in the advocacy world or if I didn't have that firsthand experience. I might have come by it in a different way, but this way feels like, all right, I'm choosing to take the positives out of my experience and pass those on without passing on the trauma.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. I get this question somewhat regularly on social media of, how do you feel like it impacted your parenting? Obviously, I wasn't a parent before, so I can't say for sure, but I definitely think that I would have been probably a little more negligent, honestly, like a little more like, nothing's going to happen to my kids. Being in this world, like I find my anxiety is more of the things that I don't know. We had a great guest on and he said that it's the fear of the unknown, which is scary. And for me, I have laid the groundwork. Like Kim said, I've had these conversations about consent. I've laid the groundwork for how to get through difficult things for them. And we've done these things so much because that's my experience. And I know that you can get through that. And I know that my kids are going to go through something difficult. So that doesn't give me anxiety because something bad's going to happen to my kids at some point. Like that's just the way the world works.
The way it is. Yeah.
But the things that give me anxiety, back to what Kim said, it's not my story. It's your story, Heather.
Yes.
It's how would I survive if something happened to my kid? So I find that I have more anxiety from being in this world. I know that they can get through what I went through because I got through it. Like I didn't have anything.
And you're preparing them almost like inadvertently. Yeah.
I had no preparation and I got through it. So I know they'll be fine.
We have our baggage, but we know what to do with our baggage. It's all the other baggage you learn about that you're kind of like, oh crap, what do I do with that? The more we know about things, like those are the things that worry about us. We know that we can handle and teach our own protection and stuff, but it's the other things. One of the things that we talked about when I was on your show a lot was the whole concept of toxic positivity, because that's always a fun one to talk about. I feel like it's another place where like the intersection of like grief and trauma are there, because I feel like the things that people say and the way they want to sometimes make themselves feel better, like a lot of those things I suspect are probably the same. For me, it always came and still comes sometimes in what I kind of call like a backhanded compliment, right? Like it would be the whole like, you're so much stronger than I am. I could never do that. I would never survive that. Or the whole like, God only gives you what you could handle stuff. Or the look at the silver lining, Jake's not in pain anymore. Like
everything
those
happens for a reason.
Yeah, oh, that's the classic, right?
I got throat punch the next person that says that.
Like you're just kind of like, are you effing kidding me right now? So I feel like those, in the beginning when I Jake died 13 years ago, and some of this language, or at least I didn't know the language, right? Like, but I'd always be like, I would feel bad about feeling mad at some of these things people would say, because I'd be like, oh, they're just trying to be nice, or they're coming from a good place. But I'd be like, so mad. Like you said, you'd want to like throat punch them.
I have many a soapbox topic, but this one especially is Kara's.
So I think this goes back to the two things can be true statement that we already made, because first and foremost, people don't understand that, yes, at some point you might be able to find reason in a bad thing that happened. It does not mean that everything happens for a reason though, right? Like we need to articulate that difference. Yes. If you are very lucky, you have access to help and or therapy, and you have some privilege, and you're very intentional, you can probably find reason in something bad that happened, right? But it doesn't mean everything happens for a reason. And I think people say this, one, because they don't know what else to say, because they're parroting what they've heard
over and over.
Because I don't know if the two of you have found this, but I sometimes find myself starting to parrot things back. Someone dies and I will find it. It's like it's coming out of my mouth and I'm like, no, bring it back.
Well, because I sometimes say the things that annoy me. Like, so it's not like I'm not saying I'm by any means perfect. This, like, I am the first one. Sometimes he'll be like, Jesus Christ, Heather, you hate when people say that. And you just did that.
Like sometimes sometimes you don't know what else to
Yeah.
say. And these are the sentiments that you have heard other people say. And so you say them back. But then sometimes it's also this aspect of people don't want to hear about your bad days and they don't want to hear about your bad feelings and they don't know how to handle them and they don't know how to sit with people in the misery.
Yes.
Like when you're hurting and you're struggling, you don't want platitudes.
Nope.
You don't want someone to say it's going to get better. You just want
You want to
somebody
sit in it and sit with you in it.
You want somebody to be like, man, that sucks so bad. That's it. That's all you need to hear. That sucks. I don't even need to tell you I'm sorry. I want you to acknowledge like this is a really shitty situation. Like that's it. And so I think that the more we talk about it and the more that we give people other language of, this is what we actually say. And it can even be one of the things like Kim, I know that she's surprised I haven't said it yet. One of the things that bothered me for the longest time was when people would say, I'm so sorry that happened. I'm so sorry. And I'm like, what do I say to that? Thanks.
Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm fine-ish. Like there's no good response to it, right? And so that one bothered me for a really long time. Or people telling me you're so strong, because I was like, I literally just survived. Like I don't feel
and you're like, what else was I gonna do? Like, I mean, it's kind of, I feel like sometimes it's like
my chance is death or survive.
I chose survive. Yeah.
I'm here. Right. So I think most people are well-meaning. And I think that, that the more that we have these conversations of the bad stuff and like show that, hey, something bad happened, but I'm not trembling in a corner, like I'm picking myself up, it allows people to be more comfortable with the discomfort. And so it's important.
I think that's what's so important about these conversations. And I love the one thing you said, because it's another thing that I have said to people, because people are like, it's exactly what we said. They don't know what to say. And I said, sometimes you just say that sucks. It's that simple. Acknowledge it. Like it sucks. Like I don't need you to try and make me feel better, because that's not going to come from some cliche thing you say to me anyways. Like that's not going to all of a sudden, I'm not going to be like, oh, right. That is what God wanted for me. Okay. Like
time's going to heal all of
your wounds. Them. Okay, great. I'll just wait a little while. Like
what fortune cookie wording are you going to give me today? No, thank you.
No,
the other thing that I was thinking of though, as you're talking about this, is when we start to open our minds to learning anything or taking in any new information, we're human sponges. We become a mosaic of all of the experiences and the people around us. And so, we're going to start parroting those things. But that's why it's so important to be intentional about the things that you're putting into your ear holes and your brain, is because we need to be around those people who aren't just going to parrot things back to us about whatever makes them feel comfortable. I know that we've talked about this, and there's a whole concept about dissociating from being a victim. So people love to, let's go into victim blaming in whatever way it is. And I want to caveat this by saying it's not always their intention, but the victim blaming aspect allows our brains to say, I have control over this thing that this victim did, and therefore I can change that. I can control it and it won't happen to me.
I can protect myself.
I can protect myself because this is what I would do differently. That's where you get down to, well, what were you wearing? How much did you have to drink? Because people want to believe that they can control and have this not happen to them. Yeah. And it's just not the case. Yeah. So the psychology behind that, great. We understand this. But when it comes to making someone feel better or being positive, if you aren't presenting the way that they think you should be, it again is creating that discomfort within them, within their mind. And they need to write that. So it is about them. It's not about us as the survivor. And it's okay for us to say, I don't like that. Me especially, I always say pathological people pleaser. Like, I'm going to put on my smile and mask and make you feel as comfortable as possible because that's what makes me feel comfortable. I'm not good with the discomfort. And then this huge trauma happens and everyone knows about it. And I'm going to sit there and get those looks from people that are like, I want to say something. I want to ask her something, but I'm not going to. So I'm just going to keep looking at her. And I'm hoping this isn't awkward. And I'm sitting there like, just say it. Just whatever.
Put it out there. Yeah.
Yes. Like, let's be real. I cannot stand small talk, but just ask me. I didn't have that comfort smile, make everyone happy to hide behind anymore. And that was really when that toxic positivity started unraveling for me. Now, I didn't have the verbiage for it. I didn't know that that's what it was called, but I could not sustain that positive outward appearance at all times anymore. I couldn't do it. I was too busy having my brain, my body work on that trauma and simply surviving it day to day. And so that mask slips. Kara and I just talked about this on the podcast with our masks. And it is so much harder to hold that mask in place for the benefit of others when you are dealing with something traumatic and trying your best to just get through it. And that's okay. We need to be okay with seeing that. We need to hold that space, because the more people know that that is okay, the better it's going to be for everybody when, not if, when you get to a place where you have to do that as well.
Well, and that's exactly right. Like, everybody is going to have their thing. You know, it's kind of like, Kara, when you were saying, like, bad things are going to happen to your kids. Like, bad things happen in life. Like, hopefully they're not, you know, you want your kids not to have the horrible things, but things are going to happen. It's so interesting what you were saying, Kim, because I do think for so long, like, the people pleasing thing, like, I remember in the days and at Jake's wake, like people would just say these things to me, and I didn't know that I could kind of be like, hey, wait, like, why would you say that to, like, I didn't know that I could do anything but take it. And it took me a really long time to sort of be comfortable enough in my skin or in my feelings or in my emotions or whatever, that I could kind of not only say, like, hey, that's kind of a weird thing to say to me, or to start talking about it. Because for so, like, years, I just was kind of like, I felt like it was my fault. Like, I was like, oh, maybe they're right. We're conditioned sometimes. And I think I'm older than you guys, but like, for so long, I just didn't feel like that was, I had to just keep my mouth shut about it.
And it's not our job to carry the discomfort of others. Yeah. We got our own freaking trauma. It's heavy enough. We don't need to make you feel,
we don't need everyone else's
of 100%.
That.
Yeah, which is like, that was kind of, it took me a while to figure out the articulation behind why people saying I'm sorry felt bad to me, but it's exactly that. It's because when someone would hear my story and they would say I'm so sorry, then it switches to me having to comfort,
well, make
that
them
person.
Feel better.
Exactly.
Right. Remove the discomfort. Like, you don't have to be sorry. I'm fine. Or whatever. Like, I have to placate them. So often what people don't realize is when they say I'm sorry that happened, or I'm so sorry, it's like it turns the focus from the person who's going through the shitty thing to the person who's saying I'm sorry, because it's like, oh, I'm sorry, like, my feelings, validate my feelings.
Exactly. It's shifting it from them trying to make you feel better to you trying to make them feel better.
Well, and you can become really intentional. Like, this was part of what I learned when I was training to be a victim advocate too. Have you ever heard of Toastmasters?
No.
I know it's like kind of weird. There's like a whole book and thing. I don't know. It's for people learning public speaking. Okay. I have never done it. What I was told about it is that there's this piece about like writing a wedding speech or something where you take the word I out of it. So you're writing this speech, not about you. You're writing it about the bride and the groom, or the groom and the groom, or the bride and the bride, or whomever. It's about the person that you're celebrating, not about you. And with that intention, you can write somebody a card. What are you putting in the card? Is it about you? Or is it about that person? And you really start to dissect your language. And that's the most key part to advocacy for me. When I talk about soaking up that energy, I had a fantastic supervisor when I started there, who was there actually as an advocate when my case went through. And then I'm getting to learn from her to do that work. And she had the best way of just sitting and allowing that pregnant pause. That's really awkward for me because I like to fill all silence with everything, but she could just sit with it and sit with me. I took some of that where I can now I can wait. I don't have to fill that silence. I can let you sit and piece that out yourself. And so those little pieces that we pick up along the way, make it about that person, not about yourself.
That is such a good reminder too, in that pause, because I am so guilty on all aspects of my life of trying to fill that pause. Like, I'm like, okay, like whether it's with my husband, my son, on the podcast, like, it annoys me sometimes that I still have to work so hard at it, because when I remember to do it, there's often these like gems that come out. I always have to remind myself that my mind is going fast and not everyone's is like racing through life.
Motivational interviewing, that was a big technique that you learned about too. Interrogations. My husband, Mike, was being interviewed by Keith Morrison for this Dateline episode. We knew going into it, Keith is the master of pregnant pauses. I'm looking at this from behind the scenes. I'm kind of doing the media relations And Mike, who is a trained trial prosecutor, keeps filling those gaps. Like he keeps talking, and Keith's sitting there and he's filling it. And it was because it makes everybody uncomfortable,
Yep.
right? That's a great journalistic technique. And I had him break, and I was like, Mike, do you even realize that
What's
you're
happening?
doing this? Yeah. He's like, ah. And it's so great to watch that, because sometimes when you can sit with that uncomfortable feeling, whether it's an interview, a conversation, or in advocacy, you're going to get a lot more out of it.
So another thing where I think our worlds sort of, I don't know, are similar. So I say this a lot of times, like on the show and in my life, like I feel like I'm the elephant in the room. I feel like when I am at an event, even 13 years later, right? Like, it's like, oh, her son died. It's like I have a sign over my head. That's sometimes how people identify me as, or like I almost feel like I can hear the whispers. Oh, there's that couple that son died, you know? And I think two things of that. Like, I think one is, I've always said that it's almost like people, that's how they identify me, but it's also like they're grateful they're not me, right? Like, because they're kind of like, oh, hey, that didn't happen to me. Like, maybe it'll never happen to me because it happened to her and I know her. Like there's this whole like justifying thing that people do. I suspect that you guys have similar experiences to that.
I feel like Kim already kind of talked about this a little bit. So expand upon it a little, Kim. Go ahead.
Just that look. People are looking and they know, and it's this ick feeling that's putting you on the spot. It isn't a spotlight effect in that regard, where you actually know that literally is what someone is saying or thinking about, as opposed to spotlighting where you think everyone knows everything. And no. Like, no one thinks about you as much as you think about you until there's something traumatic that they can gossip about. Then absolutely.
Well, there's a super identifier, right? Like there's like a one word thing that's like, oh, there's that. Yeah.
Well, and you have a lot of people that'll do like behaviors that seek out those really high highs or dopamine or some ways to rebrand themselves. Take a step back and look at our society and culture as a whole. Maybe what you see on the front of magazines as you're checking out at the grocery store. You have a lot of people who have suffered deep, awful trauma trying to rebrand themselves. They're obviously under a lot of scrutiny, but you see people do this in your everyday lives too. And when it happens to kids, to teenagers, to young adults, people look at that rebranding as just, oh, that's part of them growing up, where actually, no, I'm trying to figure out who the heck I am now. To have people still whispering about something that happened, I don't want to be, oh, that's that girl that was raped. I want to be, oh, that's that girl that lost her clip-in extension on the dance floor at Cowboy line dancing.
Is that a real story, Kimberly?
It may or may not be. And it also ended up at these guys' house on the pinata. Woohoo! To the pinata on top of their TV entertainment center. And I just was there 6 months later or so and took it off and clipped it back in.
I feel like I was introduced to this whole concept very early on, because one of the questions I get often is, what was one of the hardest things about your trauma? And for like all intents and purposes, it was going back to school. I was in high school. You know, there were the people that wanted to be part of the story, right? I was in the hospital when Kara came in, and if a man came in the room, she was climbing the walls and she was terrified. And it's like,
stop it.
I don't even know who you are. Yeah. There's like people that would do that. But then there was also what Kim referenced a little bit earlier, which is people who I could tell were like trying to dance around the topic, or they were asking my friends what happened. And I would literally look at them and be like, just ask me. Like, I am actually okay talking about it. Yep. Let's just talk about it. Like, if you have a question, I would rather you come to me and ask it than try to find it through the grapevine. Yeah. I'm just going to tell you the wrong thing. But now as an adult, I find that it looks a little different. And I'm sure that both of you will identify with this. I know Kim does, which is whenever people say, and what do you do for a living? And you're like, well, because inevitably, you know, oh, I'm a keynote speaker. Well, what do you keynote speak on? I mean, I just had this yesterday, like a friend of a friend came over and they came in and they walked past my office and he's like, oh, so you're a keynote speaker. And he, you know, what do you keynote speak on? I'm like, you just walked by the office. Did you see the People magazine cover in there?
See it?
No. Okay. Like, so that I have to tell people and they're just always like, what? So it always like takes people aback. But I think that when we are very upfront and we're very honest and it like very matter of fact, like, yeah, this thing happened to me, but like, look at where I am now. initially it takes a lot of people aback, but when they see that you're able to talk about it, then they're like, oh wait, I have questions.
Then they don't have to like whisper about it. Yeah.
It is very interesting how it looks different stages and different ages, I guess.
And then you get to skip the small talk too, which I personally can't stand. And it's like, ooh, let's go deep.
You go right in.
Your traumas too.
Let's exchange. Let's exchange stories here. Yeah. All right. So the last segment of our show, and it has been like hit or miss really, but we do this little segment where it's called Ask Heather Anything.
And my mind went to what are your thoughts on laser hair removal / what's your style?
And I can say that I wish I did laser like 15 years ago.
I do this as I'm stroking my knee hair because I rarely have it. But I have an at-home laser that like
Does it work?
Oh yeah. I did professional treatments and then COVID hit. And so that was my Mother's Day gift. And I do my own at-home laser, like to follow it up. And I'm like petting my knee here during this.
Like ooh, I can't.
But there was something a long time ago about, is the style switching? Like, how do we know what the trends are?
I don't know what the young kids do. And I frankly don't want to think about it.
I saw this thing. This is applicable. I saw this thing a couple days ago, and it was like what people's grooming habits are depending on their relationship status and their gender. And so like women, it was like single, like dating, friends with benefits, long-term relationship, long distance relationship, married. And for the women, there was huge amounts of variability based on their life, where they were. Men, straight across the board, didn't matter. It was the same percentages.
Regardless of
relationship status. There was like 1 to 2% differences.
That's funny.
And I was like, do you know what this tells me? It tells me that women care about what their partners think and men don't give a shit.
They do not.
They're like,
no.
Yeah.
They're like, do what they're going to do. Yeah.
I just found that fascinating. I saw it like yesterday or the day before, and I haven't had anybody to talk to about it. We are. I don't think I have anything to follow up with on that.
Hey guys, don't forget, check out Magic Mind, magicmind.com/place of yes, 20% off, place of yes 20. Give it a try. Thank you for listening to A Place of Yes. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend, anybody who might benefit from listening to this. It would make a world of difference if we could just reach more people and share the work that we do and the stories we want to tell. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave us a thumbs up or leave us a comment. We would appreciate all that you can do. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend or two.